You are listening to Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. We now present The Bottomless Well, hosted by Father Scott Lewis.
Welcome to a Holy Week edition of The Bottomless Well. This is Father Scott Lewis. This has probably been the strangest Holy Week that you've ever spent in your life. I know it is for me. Most of us are in lockdown, the streets are empty, everything is canceled. For the first time in my life, my appointment book is completely clear. And it can be very strange not to be going to church, not to be taking part in the Holy Week liturgies. But it is an inconvenience, and it is a disappointment, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity to begin to find God in other ways, to begin to experience community in a different way. So with that in mind, I would like to be with you for the next 4 days for a reflection on the normal readings that we have during the liturgies, and something that will give you food for reflection and prayer during this difficult time. We begin with Holy Thursday, and of course we begin with the reading from the Gospel of John. Before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." And Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason, he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, put on his robe, and returned to the table, Jesus said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for that is what I am. So if I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you." The Gospel of the Lord. Now, every year we celebrate Holy Week with the same set of readings, and they haven't changed a bit in the last 365 days, but hopefully we've changed a bit, but as we know, the world has, definitely, in very dramatic ways. And we're in the midst of a devastating and frightening pandemic, and the end is not yet in sight. But you know, pandemics and plagues are no stranger to the Bible. There were many, along with many other disasters. And when you look back over the long haul through history, our time is not much worse than any other, perhaps on a bigger scale, and we know about it more. But as always, there are those who have frightened many with their insistence that this is the punishment of God. Well, we should not listen to them. For they are fearmongers, and they're a major part of the problem. This is not a time for fear. This is a time for great love, great sacrifice, and great generosity. We've just heard the story of the foot washing, and that was given to us not so that we can have a ceremony for Holy Thursday, although unfortunately that's sometimes how we treat it. It's given us an example of a formula, a way out to show us how we can be set free from the fear and selfishness that makes human life so miserable and creates such negativity in the world. So let us encounter the readings in light of what the world is currently experiencing. Let's set the scene in our minds. The disciples have assembled in the upper room, and they expect that Jesus is going to begin the meal. But then he does something surprising and shocking. He removes his robe, he girds himself with a towel, and taking a basin of water, he begins to wash the feet of the disciples and to dry them with the towel. This was traditionally the task of the lowest slave of the house, and only a Gentile slave could be forced to do it. The room is filled with stunned silence. They don't know what to make of it, and they don't know what to say. Peter is never at a loss for words, and after a few minutes he can't contain himself any longer, and he blurts out, "You're never going to wash my feet." Now, is this shame and humility on Peter's part? Perhaps, but also maybe a little bit of fear, because Peter perhaps senses that this is where Jesus was going with his teachings and his deeds of mercy, and it makes him nervous. This wasn't exactly what he had in mind when he signed on. And if we read through the Gospels, we know that the disciples were kind of hoping to hitch their wagon to a success story and to kind of share in the glory of the kingdom. After finishing and putting on his robe again, Jesus had some more words for them. First of all, he asked them if they understood what he had just done, but he was a realist. He realized that they hadn't. They were absolutely clueless. He said, "You call me teacher and Lord, and fine, that's well and good, that's exactly what I am. But that's the whole point. If I, who am your teacher and Lord, am willing to do such lowly tasks joyfully and without resentment or shame, how much more all of you should do likewise." And he used the word. In Greek, it's the same one in English, paradigm, model. He says, "I've given you a paradigm, a model." And it's a paradigm or a model for life, for those who claim to follow him, but it's also a model for authentic human life, for someone of any faith, or even no faith at all. It's an example, too, of humility, divine humility, and the humility to which we're all called, but there's a word of caution that has to be given here. Humility has a very bad name, because it has been so misused. It's often used to oppress and crush the spirit of other people. And what humility really means is you shut up and do what I tell you to do. And that's not what humility is. It can be used to absolutely crush the spirit of others and to break them. And again, this is not what humility is. Humility is not becoming a doormat for others or failing to have self-respect. And far from it. That humility is the mark of one who is comfortable in their own skin and grateful to God for who and what they are. We must feel loved and we must feel worth something in order to be truly humble. Because when we feel that way, we are not afraid to be vulnerable. We're not afraid to do things that others might look down their nose at. And we're not afraid to do things that might lose us, kind of the respect of other people in that sense. We're perfectly comfortable with just who we are. And there's a sense of gratitude. And so when we are truly comfortable in our own skin, then we can be humble. And we can begin to live out the divine gift that we are given, and that divine gift is love. Love is another word that suffers a lot of abuse. Love is not warm feelings. It's not romance. It's not the kind of things where we, just feel like warm, fuzzy feelings or whatever. Love is a verb. It's very practical. It's hands-on. It's a definition of how we treat one another and what we're willing to do for one another. When we hold somebody up, when we give them encouragement, we are loving them. When we give them the necessities of life, whether it be food, whether it be clothing, whether it be a shelter, we are loving them. When we show care for their well-being and happiness, we are loving them. We can be filled with all kinds of warm, fuzzy feelings and not really care for anyone and not really do anything to help them. And then we really have to ask what we are actually experiencing. So true religion is measured by love, and that's always opposed to death-dealing religion, which is measured by fear. And unfortunately, there's far too much of that. And so it is the willingness to be humble and not feel diminished or dishonored by such service. There's a wonderful illustration of this in the story of Mahatma Gandhi. That once during his lifetime, he was traveling to a village with some of his followers, and as they were walking along the path, they came to a place that was filled with broken glass and trash and human excrement. And it wasn't exactly the welcome mat. The message was clear: keep moving, we don't want you here. And many of his followers were ready to turn back, but not the Mahatma. He just silently took a bunch of branches in his hand and began sweeping the path in front of him. And of course, street sweeping, is the job of the lowliest caste. The great man did not feel the least bit diminished by doing such service. And so without saying a word, he gave also a model or a paradigm. Now, there are some who say, this is really a recipe for abuse, that you have this top-down, hierarchical, enforced humility where we kind of keep people in line and demand service from other people. But as an eminent theologian has pointed out, that really what he's really giving us here is a new order of being. It's really a willed and willing kind of service that we give one another. It's nothing forced. It is something we do for one another. Tonight, what do we celebrate? Well, we celebrate the birth of Christian discipleship. We celebrate the birth of Christian discipleship, and I think we should focus on that. It's not just about the priesthood. It's about all of us, and it's about discipleship. It's where we celebrate equality and unity with others, and the way we experience one another in the body that is Christ. It is really a celebration of community, true community. During this crisis, we've seen many examples of selfishness and exploitation, but these are far outnumbered by the countless instances of incredible generosity and kindness that we've seen. We've seen people who shop for those who are in lockdown, or who sing and write letters and make phone calls to keep the spirits of others up. We see people who share resources, whether it be money, whether it be anything. And we've seen instances of forgiveness of debts and the willingness to help those who are without shelter, those who are without financial means, and so on. But we've also seen the heroic dedication of doctors and nurses who have worked to the point of exhaustion, and some of them, tragically, even to the point of death. The pattern we live out every day is in the most insignificant, and I put insignificant in quotation marks, is really the pattern of how well we are living out this divine humility and this divine love. We ask the question, was this pandemic, was this plague sent by God? It's not likely. It's not likely. God is not in the business of visiting plagues on the elderly or doctors and nurses. But at the same time, we will be judged by how we respond to it. How we respond to it both individually and as a church and as a nation. So we ask the question, and this is for our own prayer and our own reflection. Do we treasure one another? And is the well-being of others at the top of our list? Do we experience community wherever we worship and pray? Are we willing to give of ourselves? Or do we just head for the door as soon as we can? During times like this, we discover who we are, and we discover who other people really are. It brings out the worst in some people, it brings out the best in many. So at the end of all this, we perhaps can make an intentional affirmation to metaphorically wash one another's feet. We don't do that when people come to our house for dinner. And if we did, people would think we're weird and they wouldn't come back, because they would think that we're implying that their feet are dirty. But we can metaphorically wash one another's feet, and perhaps we can think of what some of the similar things would be in our own culture. And so during the crisis, we can do this, but it shouldn't end when the crisis is over. And unfortunately, sometimes the great lessons that we learn end as soon as the heat is off. It is something that we have to carry on with. It is something we have to really begin to make part of our everyday lives, living for others, living for the common good, being an example and a representative of God's compassion and mercy in the world. This is really what Holy Thursday is about. It's really what we are called to, radical discipleship, not mere belonging to a religion, but being the follower of the one who gave of himself even to the cross.
You have been listening to The Bottomless Well, hosted by Father Scott Lewis, here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are.